experts, and I do not use that term lightly tonight, that we have presenting for us. They are Alyssa Munoz, who is the Executive Director of the NOLA Food Policy Council, and Bahia Nightingale, who is the Executive Director of Food and Farms with Louisiana Central. And they're going to educate us this evening on food policy one-on-one. So I will turn it over to our food policy educators for this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Cecilia. Super happy to be here. Just so you can get faces with names or voices with names, I'm Alyssa Munoz. Bahia, if you want to introduce yourself quickly.
Bahia Nightingale with Louisiana Central, and just so happy to have you all with us here this evening. Very excited to talk about policy.
Yeah, so this will be like an overview of what is food policy. It is vast and encompasses a lot more than what we're going to talk about. But we're going to try to hit on the highlights, if you will. And if you're interested in learning more, we'd love to do that alongside you. And if you're interested in impacting food policy, we will get into more about how you do that in the presentation, but please reach out to us. All that information will be at the end. All right, so like I said, food policy encompasses a lot. So what is food policy? Basically, all of the rules and policies and laws and everything that governs what we eat. And I say what we eat, and I mean everything from when you put the seed in the ground, or even kind of before that, getting the ground ready, all the way to when like the waste from the food. So planting, growing, harvesting, processing, distributing, selling, consuming, and then the waste, all of that is food policy is related to that. So this slide is kind of like what I call the big P policy, and those are laws and regulations. So you can see that what we call nutrition entitlement programs like SNAP, which is formerly known as food stamps, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, WIC, the Women, Infants, and Children, our larger national hunger programs, school food, after-school feeding programs, emergency feeding programs, food waste, so composting, runoff, the laws that govern your like grocery stores, so the health department, the code, all of that stuff. Like we said, obviously agriculture and farming, and then other land use that like livestock, chickens, community gardens, all that sort of thing. That's kind of what I call big P policy. Additionally, food policy is also what we call little p policy, and that is the policies that policies and like systems that govern what we eat in a different way. So maybe aren't governing like big government, but like school systems, they have policies within the school systems that are considered part of food policy, even though it may not be sort of like on the books at Louisiana State, if you will, but who they procure from, how they serve the food to children. Institutions have policies, institutions like hospitals and universities. They all have policies on how they serve food, get food, that kind of thing. Distributors have tons of policies around deliveries, around insurance, around drivers, that sort of thing, around taking food, giving food to you. And then retailers, grocery stores, farmers markets, farm stands, they all have their own what we call little p policies. And these are the internal systems regulations. But they are just as important, and in some cases, more important than the big P policies that sort of govern, if you will, or what we generally think of as governing. Because this is like where the rubber meets the road, how things are done. So this would sort of be like, you know, if you think about your workplace, labor laws are the big P policy, but your handbook, the way that you do things at your office, those are the little p policies and the things that probably impact you more. And I also wanted to say, please, if you'd like, be active in the chat, ask questions, any insights, anything that comes to mind, we will be monitoring the chat. So, and Bahia, feel free if there's a question that comes in to interrupt me, and we can answer that. So food policy councils, and that is what I run in New Orleans. They help local farms, food, hunger organizations, food related businesses, everybody join together to advocate for sound food policies. We create networks that support organizations, build partnerships so that we can advocate together. We sort of pull all the people in the area who are working on food or who are impacted. Well, impacted by food is tricky because we all are. But for whom we say it's people who are trying to grow, sell, make, or help people eat healthy food. We pull them together so that we have a unified voice and can work together on policy. We do that through our working groups, and those are kind of the areas where we feel that we want to work on the most. So we have food access, small food business development, food production, seafood. I'm sorry, we have so many of them that I'm forgetting the last one. Food waste and recovery, excuse me. That we work on. Those are sort of the issue areas that we see in the New Orleans area. Each area may have their own issues, or they will have their own issues that are important to them. So food policy is, there's different sort of levels of, let me go at this a different way. It's really important to know who is in charge, if you will, of which policy, because if you want to make a change, then you really need to know, like, who do I call? So if it's something where you really think that there needs to be changes in SNAP, then calling your mayor is not going to be as impactful. Who you need to call is your senator in DC, because SNAP is something that is done at the federal level, or your state, because they implement the program. So at the federal level, there is no single federal food agency. There are 20 different departments and agencies that play some role in shaping our food system. A few of the large ones are the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, the Department of, do they call it Health and Human Services or Child and Family Services at the federal level? I can't remember right now. Those are some of the major ones that govern the food system at the federal level. Then there's the state level, and the state really means that they have regulating like the retail. They also regulate a lot of how things operate. So SNAP comes from the federal level, but the state can choose which exemptions to apply for, how to operate the program. And that's where you have like sort of where the rubber meets the road on the implementation of the program. So you'll have your state health department, you'll have your state, obviously, Department of Agriculture, and then local government initiatives are like the things like zoning is something that is at the local level. And our Food Policy Council started only working at the local level. But as we've seen, especially in the last few years, only working at the local level means that there are some things you just can't change. So like I said, SNAP, WIC, school food, we can work on those at those little p policy levels at the local level. But if we want to enact greater change, we have to go sort of outward to the state and federal level. So a few of the big things that govern the food system on the federal level are the Farm Bill. This is a Farm Bill year, so I feel like I've been talking about the Farm Bill a ton. The Farm Bill is something that is reauthorized every 5 years. 2023 is a Farm Bill year. This governs most of the food that we eat. It should be called the Food and Farm Bill. SNAP, commodities, small scale agriculture, insurance, research, all of that is in there. Funding extension agencies, funding SARE, that's all in the Farm Bill. And I'll talk more about that at the end, but we also did a very in-depth, well, not very in-depth, but we did a pretty in-depth webinar on the Farm Bill that we can put the link to in the chat. And we will actually be having another one in about 6 weeks that I can share with Cecilia. Another huge federal bill is the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act. That is something that is supposed to be reauthorized every 5 years like the Farm Bill. Unfortunately, we have not reauthorized it since 2010. So we're a little behind, and that is school food, after school food, CACFP, which is like sort of Head Start and senior center feeding, and WIC is all part of that. And then some other federal programs, and this is especially of late, but all the COVID recovery, that most of that came from the federal level. The American Rescue Plan Act, the infrastructure bills, all that is federal. I'm going to turn this over to Bahia, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa, so much. Okay, so state is sort of that middle ground between our big P policy and our little p policy, and who we sort of deal with at the state level. We deal with the Louisiana Department of Ag, the Louisiana Department of Health, the Louisiana Department of Education, Department of Child and Family Services, and our state representatives and senators. And they all have very specific functions and roles in the policy work that's done across the state. And so, of course, our Department of Agriculture has a lot of sway in matters of farming, land use, agriculture, and food safety regulations. The state government often acts as a bridge between federal legislation and local implementation. And so we see a lot of that in Louisiana with work in agriculture and food safety as well. Department of Health, of course, runs our women, infants, and children's nutrition program. They have a huge impact in the world of sanitation, of course. If you're trying to open a small food business, you're going to work with the Department of Health quite a bit. And then the one where we do a lot of work around policy and outreach and education is the Louisiana Cottage Food Law. And every state in the nation has some form of a cottage food law. And basically, the states exert their right to regulate food businesses outside of those 20 federal agencies to custom make some policies that respond to the culture and climate of their own state. And so the Louisiana Cottage Food Law is an important piece of policy that impacts a lot of local food systems. So we do a lot of work with that. Of course, the Department of Education with school, child, and adult community feeding programs school feeding programs are an absolutely crucial part of making sure that children have their nutritional needs met, and that program expands into their families as well. So school feeding is incredibly important and has a direct impact every day in your community at a very, very local level. And that, of course, is a state program. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and WIC are both federal programs, but they are coordinated at the state level by Department of Child and Family Services. And so it's incredibly important that we can support SNAP and WIC in Louisiana with some state outreach and education, and some policy work can be done at the state level to impact how those federal programs get deployed on the ground in our state, in our communities. And of course, when we start talking about the legislature, that's where we make bills and resolutions and acts and taxes. A great example of that is Grow the Good, a new program with state funding that is supporting an expansion of SNAP matching benefits at farmers markets and farm stands around the state. There are also tax incentives that the state legislature coordinates, and of course SNAP work requirements are done in those sorts of programs. Those are federal programs, but again, they sort of have a bridge with state legislature. And so there is an enormous amount of influence that can be brought to bear at the state level. And in a lot of ways, those are the programs where we feel the impact on a daily basis. It's in our schools, it's in our hospitals, it's in our places of work. It's all of the ways that we live our life every day. So I think next, Alyssa's going to come back and talk about local.
Yes, thank you. Right, so local, these, and we have the urban rural divide is real, and the local is where it can be a little tricky. So some areas, your city council runs everything. And so the things that I have here written that they do is sort of like generally what they do, but each municipality, each local area kind of runs itself differently. But these are just some examples. So a city council, local taxes, policies, city services, ordinances, on the whole, they operate like the legislative branch of the government. Then there's the mayor's offices, and they tend to do budgets. They appoint department heads and offices, and they kind of operate as the executive branch of the local government. And then this is what I'm just learning about because we don't have it in New Orleans, but a police jury. And that's the legislative and executive body of the parish and is elected by voters. And if anybody wants to talk more about them, because that is not something I know much about, but I'm learning. And then our school boards can enact a ton, they have a ton of influence on where you live. So school charters, who can run a school, the curriculum, which is just, I mean, you guys have probably seen school boards are in fights all over the country. Contracts for services, including school lunch, waste removal, the programs that can come into a school. So whether or not a school can help with like community services like SNAP applications, or if they do community eligibility for school lunches. And then the health department. So local health departments tend to do emergency preparedness. They also do WIC. WIC is one of those that kind of is at all levels, which is really interesting. Medical testing, vaccines, community health. And then they tend to do some sanitation for restaurants. And they also will kind of connect you with like the fire department for your fire code for your restaurant and that sort of thing. Okay, so now that we've talked about like who governs what, say you're like, okay, I really want to change this, this one thing. I want to make it so that I can keep chickens in my backyard. Right now, I'm only allowed to have 2. I really want 4. I'm just making something up. So how do I go about doing that? And a lot of you in the room are either with nonprofits or some sort of state agency. So the lobbying versus advocacy question looms large. And I think that a lot of people are really afraid to do any policy work because of this advocacy versus lobbying. Everyone's afraid they're lobbying, and lobbying is like big X no for so many groups, or they assume that it's a big X no for a lot of groups. So I just wanted to add that in here. So advocacy is what you tend to already do. So that's any action that is, it's like educating. So advocacy would be saying, that you, I'm trying to think of a good example of advocacy. So when we went to the Capitol for Grow the Good, we had a lobbyist with us and we had me who can lobby some. And then we had a lot of community partners. The community partners could say to the lawmakers, hey, SNAP eligible, or the ability to get access to good food for those who are SNAP eligible is really tricky in my community. And we have high rates of obesity and diet-related diseases. Our farmers can't support themselves. And so that's really an important issue. That is advocacy. Lobbying is when I come in and say, hey, all of these issues are true. And if you vote yes to HR1, we can help solve those. So lobbying is when you are speaking about a piece of legislation. You're trying to influence a piece of legislation. Advocacy is when you are trying to educate about why we need change in general. Is that clear as mud? How I always think of it is, if you say vote yes for X, that is lobbying. If you say we need smarter land use regulations in the state of Louisiana, that is advocacy. All right, I see Joy is giving me a thumbs up. Thanks, Joy. I'm going to turn this over to Bahia to talk about how we actually, like, you know, I've talked lobbying and advocacy. So what does that look like? How do you advocate in real life?
Right. So a lot of times it can be very disconcerting to be to choose to be in a place or to be asked to be in a place where you're advocating on behalf of something. And the food system is such a complex system that it can feel overwhelming. But when you find that one thing, or maybe you find lots of things that you want to advocate for across the spectrum of little p and big P policymakers, there's some very simple ways of going about doing these things. And so, of course, I can't recommend enough attending city council meetings, parish police juror meetings, absolutely being in those spaces and signing up to make a public comment so the public comment goes on record. And you can do that to show support or opposition for a current policy or a pending policy or action. And public comments are public record, which means it's preserved, you know, in perpetuity. And so public comments at public meetings are a really important part. And in actuality, they are the bedrock of our entire government. The fact that we not only have a right, but it's codified as a right in our law books that you, without being a property owner or a person of significance, which are requirements to make public policy meetings in other countries, you can just show up and go on public record and make a statement. And that's really influential. I used to work for a mid-sized city, and one of the biggest complaints we got as city government was we didn't create enough space to hear comments. But when we explained that that's what the whole public meeting is for, everyone always said, well, I don't want to go to the meeting. And so we would have city council meetings and no one would make comments. And then they would get very, very angry. And so I really, really want to encourage you to go to these meetings and to take advantage of that public comment period. And they usually, there's some guidelines, like usually they say you've got a minute or you've got 5 minutes or something like that. But it's really worthwhile, and it actually has an enormous impact on local policy. So public comment is really important. It's my personal favorite, and it's a lot of fun to go. Right.
If I can interrupt to give more love to public comments.
Yes.
So when we are working in local policy, sometimes the policies that, or the resolutions, whatever it is, like they're unanimous. People love food stuff. So it'll be unanimous. I will know that every council member is going to vote yes. And they always put our stuff at the end of the meeting. And so we go and every time I tell my staff and everyone who's with us, we are making public comment. I know that it will be voted 100%. We are still making public comment because that is on record saying that we support it. And we want our voice out there no matter what the outcome, even if we know it, we are still making public comment. And they're
Absolutely.
very easy to make. And if you are nervous, I will be glad to, if you decide you want to go, I'll be glad to walk you through, like figuring out what color is the comment card, how do you fill it out, who do you turn it into? We can help you with all of that. The other thing I wanted to say is because of COVID and at the federal level, public comments, a lot of them are now online. So you can make an online public comment on federal policies and they have to read every single public comment. So make public comment. They will read it because they have to. Not only do they have to read it, they have to record people who are for or against it. So those times when they say like, well, we know that Americans are for such and such. Well, actually, if public comment is made the other way, they have to report that. They have to say, actually, the public comment had such and such for, such and such against, and then they have to justify going against it. So if at the USDA, they put this out and, 60% of the people are like, actually, we don't like that, but they decide to do it anyway, they have to say, we are doing it despite the fact that people don't want it. And that is a lot harder for them.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm getting off my public comment soapbox now, but Bahia and I could go all day about this.
Right, absolutely we can. And to tell you the small percentage of people that actually submit public comment and the weight that it carries because of that, I just can't impress enough that public comments are incredibly valuable. They're guaranteed in our laws. We have this right, and I just encourage everybody to use them. The other way, of course, is letters and emails. And like Alyssa said, we have a lot more option to use email communications for official public comments now. And I think that's fantastic because a lot of city meetings and public meetings aren't actually that accessible. And we recognize that. And so being able to do public comments, and all federal policy goes through a public comment period where you can comment via US mail and electronic digital communication as well. And a lot of other places that's becoming way more common, and it's fantastic. And then you can do letter writing campaigns and postcard campaigns, and it's a great way to involve your neighbors and your community, your church, your school. All of those sorts of things can really come to carry a lot of weight through an email or letter writing campaign. And of course, phone calls. Public comments via phone calls are a fantastic opportunity to engage not only with elected representatives, but their staff. And communicating with the staff of elected representatives can oftentimes be easier, less stressful, and more impactful sometimes than even communicating directly with the elected official, because their mind is on a million other things. And so staff is key, and phone calls are a great way to reach staff. Setting a meeting. And so, of course, our federal and state and local folks often will allow you to request an in-person meeting. And it is always a fantastic opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation. Sometimes you can meet at a diner with over a cup of coffee and a pastry. Sometimes they're going to sit in their office behind a really big desk in a really big chair. But having a face-to-face meeting, if that's a preferred method of communication for you, where you feel very comfortable, make those appointments and meet with people and have those one-on-one conversations or small group conversations. Sharing important information around your advocacy. Social media can be used to a lot of advantage to spread information about causes that are important to you, and food systems work is no different. And so connecting with organizations on social media that are currently running education and outreach campaigns on the issue that you are also working on in your community, you have a source and you can share their information with friends and family and related organizations. So social media can be put to use as a good tool for these sorts of things. We use it a lot for our food policy work, and our food systems work in general really relies to no small extent on social media. So, like, share, comment, all of those things really matter, helping us beat the algorithms, of course, and making sure we're connecting with people that want to hear that message. And so this is how you can connect and advocate across a whole bunch of different spectrums of policy work, because this works whether you're going to meet with a federal representative or someone on your school board, or maybe even food service staff, or at a local business, the grocery store. All of these methods of advocacy work regardless of who you're advocating to.
Sorry, I couldn't get to my mute button. Yes, thank you. So important. And I put some of this in the chat, but like federal lawmakers, they actually have a period. They have a couple periods built into their year where they are specifically charged to go home and meet with constituents. And all of these things, and we can do a whole nother session on how to advocate, but it's super easy. Just tell your story, or you don't even have to. You can call and say, hey, such and such, I think that we need to have better such and such. And that's all. You don't have to go into a whole thing, or you can be like, hey, I'm an expert. I got some facts. Let's talk. So as much or as little as you want to say, but they have to hear you. It's their job. Oh, I forgot to turn off the thing. Okay. So now, what are the current actions that are happening right now at a federal, state, and local level? I'm actually going to call on you, Bahia, to talk about land access again.
Absolutely. So this land access is a really important thing. I work primarily with farmers. And so making sure that we have enough land available here in Louisiana to actually grow the food that we need in order to be a food secure state, very, very important. And so one of the issues that is very pressing right now in land access is heirs property in Louisiana and across the deep South, but all over the nation. There are practices and policies in place that disenfranchise landowners, especially African-American landowners, whether it's just a home on a small parcel in town or a large tract of agricultural land. Heirs property means that there's a clouded title, and the person who originally owned the land passes away without a will, and the land is that asset is inherited equally by all of the heirs. And then when one of those heirs passes away, it then gets split even further apart and is shared equally by all of their descendants as well as the original recipients. It's very complicated. And it's a horrible system, and it results in a lot of land loss and asset loss. And it's been a leading cause of lack of wealth accumulation by African-American families in the United States. So heirs property issues is something that we all work on and advocate for with legal partners, and not just in Louisiana, but nationwide. We provide a lot of technical assistance for finding and keeping land for agricultural production, especially. And then we also work with financial partners, both government, local, and banking partners, to make sure that we have financial products available for people so that they can acquire and keep land. So land access in Louisiana is not as dire as it is in other places, but it will be eventually. And so we're working to keep it from getting any harder here and making sure that we're supporting people so that they can maintain land ownership and also expand land ownership, especially for farmers and food producers.
Yeah, and some of this, in addition to what we're doing, here in Louisiana and in the South, is at a federal level as well. So, the USDA recently they're working on basically reparations for people not being able to get FSA loans and for having their land taken from them. And so that is something that is going to be in the Farm Bill, is sort of justice for this land loss, which leads me into the Farm Bill. I talked about it already, but we are doing a lot of work on that at a statewide level. We're actually just hopefully going to be finishing up some statewide listening sessions that we've done. We're actually trying to, our next area that we need to get a statewide listening session is in the northeastern part of the state. But what we are doing is we are pulling together specifically Louisiana small scale farmers and farm workers and listening to what their needs are. And then we are going to compile that into a report and into an advocacy plan to make sure that at the federal level and in the Farm Bill, Louisiana farmers' needs are being taken into consideration, because we are a huge agriculture state that unfortunately doesn't have a ton of representation for small scale growers in DC and in the Farm Bill. And this is the year we're trying to change that. We're also actually organizing a fly-in for Louisiana farmers to go to DC so that we can really show the needs of Louisianians in the Farm Bill. Another huge issue right now, a lot of you all, if you work in SNAP or SNAP Ed, probably know about what everyone is calling the SNAP cliff. So the COVID era increases in SNAP amounts and the exemptions have ended. And so a lot of people are losing a lot of SNAP dollars. And so there's a lot of change happening, or a lot of advocacy happening at the national level to make those COVID changes a permanent, so that people can have access to SNAP. Because one thing that we really saw during COVID is that we are already operating at an emergency food level. So many people just can't get their needs met on a daily basis. And then you add in this, public health crisis. And then in Louisiana, you add in multiple hurricanes and weather-related disasters. And we just, we really need to get us at a good starting level so that people aren't using emergency food as their everyday food. And these SNAP changes, there's actually research that shows that it has lifted a lot of people out of poverty. And SNAP and the child tax credit are two things that have been shown to raise people out of poverty, like, systemically. This is something that specifically FPAC is doing. We are doing a statewide study and report on disaster SNAP. So because of everything in Louisiana, we often give disaster SNAP more than other states. And so we are really looking at how is disaster SNAP authorized, applied for, utilized, how are people getting it throughout the state, because it's, as of right now, it is not, there's not a system where it's always done the same way. And so we want to know, how's it going throughout the state? And so we're looking at areas that have had disaster SNAP anytime in the last 5 years, which it turns out is the whole state. So actually, if this is something that you're interested in getting involved in our study, we are compensating folks for participating in research studies with us and focus groups so that we can really find out how is it going. And we're going to end with a legislative advocacy plan of how we can make sure that disaster SNAP really does what it's meant to do. And then I've mentioned this already, but child nutrition. So we're hopeful that the child nutrition reauthorization will be reauthorized in 2023 or 2024. There was one introduced, the Healthy Meals, Healthy Kids Act in 2022, that is still out there. And so we're hopeful that soon that will happen, because it's just such a sin for us to have not reauthorized the thing that feeds the most children in 13 years. Like the children who were born the last time the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act was reauthorized are now fully teenagers. So those are sort of the current actions that you can get involved in or that you can advocate for.